What do rules, barriers, silences, and molds all have in common?
They were all
They were all
They were all made.
to be broken. We are not run-of-the-mill.
We are not replaceable parts.
and we are very proudly weird.
We're neurodivergent Newfoundlanders and Labradorians.
And this
Is
Alterminds. Humans of the digital airwaves, welcome to our first ever episode of the Alterminds podcast. Are we excited?
There are lasers coming out of my eyes.
if I was any more energized for this episode, I'd be vibrating through the floor.
And I'm likewise enthralled. Since this is our very first episode, let's explain to our audience what we're all about and who we are. Passing it over to Kay. Please tell our listeners what Alterminds is all about.
Thank you. Alterminds is a podcast created by and for people who think differently. So we are autistic people from Newfoundland and Labrador, sharing our experiences and giving others a chance to share theirs too. It's basically a talk show that focuses on neurodiversity, disability rights, and our life stories. We talk about the challenges we face, the victories we've achieved, and how to support fairness for neurodivergent people everywhere. Alterminds aims to highlight the neurodiversity movement, push for disability rights, and promote acceptance of autistic individuals around the world.
Yes.
And now we introduce ourselves as the hosts and creators of Alterminds. I'll start off. My name is Kay Snow. I'm a queer autistic ADHDer. I have a formal education in neuropsychology. I'm an advocate for peer support involving neurodivergent people and neurodiversity, an active member of the autism community of Newfoundland and Labrador. I would consider myself an intersectional activist, an autism educator, and a neurodivergent public speaker. Also a single parent, which always keeps things interesting. My preferred pronouns are they, them, and I'm a certified badass.
Yes, you are. I'll go next. My name is Terry Carson Bursey, but I go by TC whenever I do anything creative. I'm an autistic Newfoundlander, the writer behind Alterminds podcast. I'm a writer who unwaveringly focuses on providing authentic representation for autistic perspectives in storytelling, despite pressure of the industry. I, too, am a single parent. I'm an autism self-advocate based in small-town Newfoundland and Labrador, a board member of ASNL, which is Autism Society of Newfoundland and Labrador. And while I'm probably not a badass...
You're a teddy bear. Come on.
Crushing my dreams. I am a disability rights activist through writing and other creative tools. My preferred pronouns are he, him, as well as they, them. I'm gray sexual, aromantic, masc to agender, gender fluid, and an all-around asocial upstart. I now pass it on over to Ange Dream Crusher Follett.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure, but there you go. My name is Angie Follett. I'm a Labrador girl by heart, but these days I live in St. John's, NL, for medical reasons rather than by choice. I'm also a Newfoundlander originally by birth, which is where my family originally hails from as well. I have several conditions. I'm autistic, have ADHD, CPTSD, spina bifida, several concussions or TBIs, and a myriad of others. I use physical aids and communication devices to help me with my daily life. I'm also hard of hearing and have low vision, and sometimes I can't orally speak. My pronouns are she, her. I will also answer for dinner and they, them. I am very active in volunteer work. I help out as a patient advisor for our local health authority, a member of the Provincial Autism Action Council, a member of the NL Center for Applied Health Research, and I'm a member of various nonprofit committees with a focus on policy, disability, aging, and poverty-based issues. I love being hands-on and making a difference in my community.
Oh, that name again is Angie Dream Crusher Follett, everybody. With all that out of the way, here is episode 1 of Alterminds. It's titled Getting to Know the Community. And speaking of Newfoundland and Labrador's neurodiversity community, our very first guest on Alterminds is none other than a pillar of the province's autism community, Bree Rossiter.
Hi.
Hey.
So Bree, can you tell us what prompted you to create the Facebook group Autism Newfoundland and Labrador? And also, How do you feel about it now becoming the largest and most influential autism group in the province?
So I created the group because at the time we only had the one autism group for the province, and it was ran by neurotypical parents for the most part. Some of them are undiagnosed autistic, as we've established many times. However, for the most part, it was ran by parents of autistic children who didn't understand autism from the autistic lens. Therefore, a lot of them were very dead set in their ways and how they thought things were and how they thought things needed to be. As parents, you want to do what's best, and you do what's best from your lens, which just so happened to be a neurotypical lens, and not the lens of the people that they were trying to protect. So basically, after a lot of arguing on that group and being shut down and told we weren't allowed to speak and that the group was not for us, it was for families and support of the people who have to deal with us, basically. I decided, actually, I was prompted by Leanne Goswell she had said to me that I should just start my own group. And I said, that's never going to work. And she said, no,
Awesome.
I'll help you. We got this. And I'm like, if you say so, so I did. I started the group, and in the middle of that argument on the other group, I just posted it to the comments. And within minutes, I think we had like 50 people join that wanted to hear what we had to say, but we were being shut down by everybody else there. So yeah, it took off pretty quick. And we just gained popularity really, really fast. And I just shared it around Facebook, and yeah, it took off pretty good. And we got more and more autistics that joined over time. I found Ange on the other group and told her to come over with us.
Come over to the dark side.
Yeah.
I didn't even need cookies to be convinced.
No,
to
you didn't need anything. You're just like, hell yeah, I'm there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then it just grew.
But yeah, it just grew, and it just kept growing, and people wanted to hear what we had to say. And it was very polar opposite to the other group. So I guess the information they were getting over there wasn't really helpful to them.
It's not.
And so they were looking elsewhere for it. And they started to realize that there was an autistic community. I should put that out there. I am a parent of autistic kids who didn't know she was autistic for a long time. And that was my only support. And when I found out I was autistic and started doing some research, that's when I started to try and put the information out there like, hey, there's a whole autistic community out here saying you're wrong.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to hear that. So I just wanted people to know that there even is an autistic community, because I wasn't aware.
You've really done a lot when you think about it in that way, because I worked for a government organization that shall not be named, I guess. And it was really hard when I was working there because I didn't know I was autistic at the time, but I was facing that same sort of vibe where I was like, y'all don't really seem to be listening to like the people that you're actually working with who have the difference or disability, whichever way they want to identify it as. Like, not everybody identifies as being disabled, but like I do. And I was very taken aback by that. And then seeing that there was no culture for it really until I found your group. And that's when I was like, oh, so there is a full community here actually.
Yeah.
So it's pretty groundbreaking in that way.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And it's just like there was so much information that was just missing from the other group. Like female presenting. I probably would have realized I was autistic.
Yes.
I was in that group 7 years before I realized there was even an autistic community. And it was a psychologist who had told me that at the time they thought my daughter was. And I'm like, no, I have a son who's autistic. And like, she's nothing like him. So I didn't realize that it's so different between females and males, or I would have known that I was when he was born. You know what I mean? When we started realizing he was autistic. But the medical model doesn't reflect our experiences as autistic people. It reflects the views of the people looking at us, not our views from like how it works for us. It's so that group is very much aimed on the medical model. But yeah, so I'm so glad it's grown to what it has. We've been able to help so many parents. and so many autistics. I mean, we are a support group for autistics first and foremost. Autistics come first in our group. We are not there for the parents. We are there for the parents to come learn if they want to. But if you don't want to learn, you can leave. Like,
here's the door.
you know, yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm not going to fight with you. And I've come to learn over time with the group that we can't help everybody. Some people don't want help. Some people don't want to learn. Some people think they're right, and that's it, and that's fine.
It's like they come for validation, and then when they don't get that, when they get when you're actually like, actually, then it's like all of a sudden, oh, we're not. We have seen it. We have seen discrimination in the group when we don't agree, and it's 100%. Really disheartening because it's like, we see that every day. It would be nice. Like I constantly try to remind people that like you don't have to agree with us, but when it comes to disability justice, you listen to the people who have that difference or have that disability. You listen to them first.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. It's a little, it's tricky because you want to help everybody, but some people just don't want help. And the thing is that I'm famous actually for telling people that don't want to listen that one day their children will find us and we will be there to give them a hug, to tell them we're sorry that their parents sucked. Like, and I don't say that to be mean. I just, we go out of our way and use a lot of energy, expend a lot of energy to make sure that we can make sure these children have better lives than some of us had.
Absolutely.
And that their parents understand them better than our parents did, because I mean, I was undiagnosed. My mom didn't have a clue what was happening. She tried, don't get me wrong, but she was missing the information she needed. And it's like, we're trying to give you that information to bridge that gap, and we do it for free. You know what I mean? Like, we're not making money off this. I'm not going to argue with you all day, but it's like, here's the information. That took enough of my energy. I'm good. If you don't want that information, don't take it. But eventually, I've come to realize a lot of those do come to the group eventually. We have a couple in the group that were the original ones arguing with me on the post that prompted me to join and make the group.
Wow.
That have come later and apologized and realized they were wrong, because I was the first one to bring it to them and they had their backup. And then they started to realize, hey, there is a whole autistic community saying this, and it wasn't just her being mean. You know what I mean? So, yeah, so it's kind of come full circle, and it's been amazing.
Right on. And I think you had some stuff you were going to ask as well.
Oh, what does my face tell on me?
A little bit.
A little bit. No, I'm hearkening back to I couldn't remember actually when and where I had virtually met Bree. I was eternally grateful that I had, for sure, because when you like me, like everybody else, when you get confirmed, you leave the office and you just feel like you've been whacked over the head with a shovel. You've been told your entire life is a lie.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And then they don't give you anything.
No.
As an adult, you've graduated past everything. They don't tell you nothing. And the best thing they do tell you, which I was really offended by at the time, was, well, just go to the internet and see what you can find. And I'm like, nobody from the medical division has ever directed me to WebMD.
And that's such a vast, such a vast, diverse thing to say. It's like the internet is like a black hole of information. What do you mean? I could literally come across anything on there. What do you mean?
Yes, exactly. And I'm like, you're really sending me there? This is your design? Okay. So I mean, it was really backwards for me, but I didn't know what else to do, right? Like, I really just didn't. And so I just typed in autistic groups. I knew enough that I did not feel comfortable with being told that I was a disorder. I'm like, no, my defaulted spine is a disorder. Okay. I don't think my brain is dying or anything here. I've never felt it to be a tragedy. It hurts when I get a headache and stuff from my TBI related stuff, but I've never felt like, that because of the way my brain operates, that I was just some kind of a lemon, and that narrative is in fact actually what's being told to so many people. So it was really hurtful. So I wanted to go find other people who felt maybe similar to me, and maybe they weren't hurting either, and that's where I found Bree was, in one of those groups. I had no idea which one. But she came to me, and it felt kind of like this awesome little whisper in my ear, and I've been following her ever since. So
I actually remember exactly what post it was. It was a parent who was asking about their child not wearing a coat outside. And I
okay.
believe you had commented on it and about them, I think, rolling down a hill or something of the sort in the post.
Okay.
And you had commented on it like sometimes they need that input and stuff. And other parents were like, absolutely not, make them wear a coat. And like it's like we're autistic. We don't feel cold the same way you do. So
Yeah.
we may not
Yeah.
be cold. You can't make us wear a coat if we're not cold.
And
If you're
some of us are
hungry, you
actually
eat. If you're not hungry,
like
you're not
sweaty.
hungry.
Like
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
sweaty. I don't want to have a coat on. I'm literally I'll be like right now I'm sweating buckets. Is why I have a tank
Yeah.
top. Like just sweating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And if
And I
you're a
think
PDAer, the
Yeah.
second that somebody tells you to put on a coat, it doesn't matter how much you might need that thing, you're never putting it on ever.
yeah,
Right?
no,
The coat is just
absolutely.
suddenly unacceptable. You're like, no.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, at that point, I had realized Ange was autistic because she seemed to make sense. And I'm like, yeah, I messaged her.
I
I'm
appreciate
like,
that. Thank you.
Are you
Yes.
autistic? I'm like, because I have a group that you might like because these parents aren't really listening to us,
Right.
just so you know.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, you're very welcome. I was glad I went and got you anyway.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. It's all good. It
Yeah.
works out, right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. I like the term neurokin. I think I think we all kind of feel that term. Very it's like a light goes off when you first hear it. And you're
Yeah.
just like, oh my God, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
For all the parents out there,
yeah.
we have perfectly fine social skills.
Yes.
Perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But it's
She's not
only with
speaking
our
for
own
me.
kind.
They're neurokins.
I
Yeah.
can't read a room to save my life. But
Our social
it's-
skills
but
are
it's-
great
yeah.
when we actually talk to each other. It's when we
Yes.
go outside of that of our neurotype to communicate in that different language. That's where we get like, oh God. But it's no different than any other language switch.
The
if I
English
just
and the
suddenly
French
started
try to
talking
communicate
Greek.
with each other.
Yeah.
And that actually sets us up for what I wanted to mention too in regards to how I met Bree, because right at the beginning of basically in the aftermath, I should say, of my own diagnosis and my son's diagnosis, I was doing as much research as I could. I fell down this huge rabbit hole. Found the neuro-affirming angle that I thought resonated with me because I have never really had any issue with my autistic traits. I knew they were there even before I wasn't diagnosed, but it was just part of who I was and part of my identity and that I really liked about myself. In that I harnessed some traits just to help me out. Like I embraced who I was and just went on, did the best with the cards that I'd been dealt, and I thought it was a good hand. And so I got into the neurodiversity angle of things real quick. The neuroaffirming angle, especially, where I looked at myself as just different rather than how a lot of people, unfortunately, do tend to look at other neurotypes, autism, ADHD, and what have you, is in that they just see it as a deficit or a detriment or the result of something going wrong somewhere. And I didn't vibe with that. And I had plenty of evidence in my life to say that it wasn't necessarily the case, at least for a lot of us. And so I ended up just coming across a certain organization's website, and I had just gotten into that certain organization myself as a member. And in it was actually a collaboration between Bree and Kay, where it defined autism. And I just stumbled across it one day, and it defined neurodiversity as different, as a difference, as just a neurotype, a cognitive or neurological difference that is like okay, but we may avail of certain resources or supports if we need to. I can't quote it verbatim, but everything about it just was spot on for how I've wanted to and how I come to understand autism as a neurotype. And I praised it up on my TikTok. I was like, these names sound familiar. I know I've heard them before, but like this is the absolute most flawless definition of autism I've ever encountered in my entire life. And then I was lucky enough to actually meet with Bree and Kay. Actually, I have only at the neurodiversity conference had I met Kay, but I've met both of you in general and gotten into speaking with you online. And it was just I was on board right from the start. Everything about it was just it made so much sense with my own outlook about my own neurotype and how I'd come to see my son and his traits and embracing autistic traits rather than trying to curb them or for sure try to treat them as if they were altogether detrimental or that somehow being allistic or neurotypical was the paragon of humanity or the default mode. You know, we're meant to exist as we are. And it was in that and discovering that community in general that's made a huge impact on my life because it's done wonders for my self-esteem and how I can look at my own neurotype and know that there are other people out there who share those same vibes. To actually form a community as strong as we have is amazing. And if it wasn't for Bree, none of that would have happened for me. So thank you too.
You're very welcome. I'm so happy. I am so happy though that, like I said, when I started, I thought Leanne was nuts. I'm like, this is not going to work. Yeah, have you seen the people arguing with me? Like they want no part of it. Like this is not going to work. And she was sure it was going to do fine. She's like, some parents want to hear it. And I'm like, and like I said, within minutes, we had like 50 members and it was at 100 within like the second day or something. Like it was, we just kept going up by the hundreds, like real fast. It was crazy. Like I think in the first little while, we had like 1,000 members in a couple months. Like it was pretty crazy. And we up and surpassed the other group real quick too. Like, I mean, we've been running, I think, 2-3 years now. And we're well past them now. And yeah, I'm just so happy that I could make a space where autistics get to talk and nobody talks over them and they're not allowed to talk over them.
We deal with them when they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is our space. You don't like it, you can go somewhere else.
There
are groups for people like you.
Do you all find though that that's why, okay, because as we're talking about this, and I know this is why I like our conversations, but like as we're talking about this, so that's the one thing that stood out for me, right? Is that all of us as autistic people were able to find each other and find research that's neuroaffirming, but then the professionals who are neurotypical or aren't autistic act like that doesn't exist. They act like that whole world doesn't exist. And I'm like, I found your group on my own, the Autism Newfoundland and Labrador, when I was working for an organization because I was working with autistic kids, right? And then when I went to my newer job, I was the one who brought up that, you know, we should be collaborating with your group with like other things to make sure that we are getting that aspect. So I think what irks me a little bit is like in the province, but also this is like nationwide and globally, right? Is that the professionals, and this is not to like hound on them so much, as to maybe just do like a call in of like, this information is accessible and it's out there. I feel like it's everybody's responsibility when they work with anybody who has anything, whether that be autism, or whether someone's deaf or blind or anything like that. Like you need to go out and look for information from those community members to see like what they actually need. And that's what bothers me. And then when they're presented with the information, it's like, what is it that makes them feel so unsafe about this new information? Or is it just that our brains are more like, because even though they act like we're like very black and white thinkers and we're very rigid, I just feel like when we're presented with information though, new information, we're just like, yes, give me that. And we keep doing it, and then it changes our mind, right?
We as autistics love information. we love knowing things. And we really, really take that information and use it. That's the thing. Like we get the information, but we also are like, oh, okay, so we will very quickly change our view on something if the facts show otherwise. And that is one thing that I don't think neurotypicals like a whole lot. I've come to notice actually, we did have a member in the group who had a direct home services worker. Now, this direct home services worker was a personal worker for us at one time as well for some of my kids. Now, I didn't use direct home services because of ABA, but I used to get them to do a assessment so that I had the paperwork, basically. Then I had the paperwork showing that they did qualify and that they were behind in this area, that area, that area. But then we would refuse direct home services because of the ABA thing, which is a whole separate conversation, but we don't do that. Now that said, we had another member in the group that had mentioned the group to this worker. And basically this worker had said to her, oh, don't mind that group. She said, they're autistic and they're black and white thinkers, so they can't see the information that we
Ableism,
have.
Oh,
And I was wild.
It's just
Let me
so
just
like
say,
it's just
vicious.
so nonchalantly being so dismissive of a whole ass group, like, and like
100%. And this is the thing. This is why I always come with facts. I always come with receipts. If I have something to say, I'll back it up with 5,000 links from 5,000 autistics and polls and research paper. Like, I come with receipts. You ain't gonna tell me I'm wrong. Like, I have the government saying TRICARE, saying that ABA doesn't work. Like, don't you can't argue with that. They literally did the biggest investigation on ABA in the world with the most members. Like, you can't argue with that.
A friend of mine calls that tism like you when you just take all that visual information and stockpile it to use.
Absolutely.
And what was it?
Like,
Eminem had a thing about that too, wasn't it? I forgot what he called it. Stacking ammo, I think.
Stacking ammo. His words. He collected words. He has
excellent.
A bin full of words, just words on paper. But yeah, so this jumps into the second question, so we can go right into that, because the changes I'd like to see is more listening, first of all. Second of all, I think a lot of it is that they want to follow what they were taught, and they were taught psychology. And they don't want to accept that what they were taught and what they paid a fortune to go to school for is wrong.
Yeah.
They don't want to accept that.
I take a small issue with that, actually. They were taught the neurotypical version of psychology.
Exactly. And this is the part that Greg, shoot, what's his last name? He's no T.
Oh, Santucci, I think his name. Something like that.
Yeah, okay.
I got to get it right as well, too, but yeah.
Yeah.
I know the guy you're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, he is one, and as well as Dr. Ross Green is another one who took their information, realized it's wrong. This isn't working. Ross Green has made it very clear he worked in that field for like 10 years. He is like, but the information I was giving them wasn't helping. Yeah. And at some point, I had to sit down and be like, why isn't it helping? Because if it was correct or if it was helpful, it would be helping. And why is it working for the other children in the home are not having these issues and this one kid is? But they have 4 other kids at home that are well behaved. So clearly there's something about this kid that's different than those kids that they're not understanding. And what we're using on the other kids isn't working for this kid. So we have to reassess what we're doing. And he's made it very clear that his training was wrong. And he started from the bottom and taught himself, given the knowledge he had and taking knowledge from elsewhere and trying to, kind of makes me wonder if he's autistic as well.
Yes.
I find people
because he actually
only
takes
have
the information and uses it.
I find people only have the guts to ask that question if they actually are, neurodivergent.
Well, like, there's a critical thought thing to that. It's like, so like, I got my psych degree. I took psychology. So like, it hits me in the place where I'm like, because I've loved psych. That's been my special interest since I was a kid. Like, I've loved psychology for a very long time. But there is a heavy obsession with behavior, and I could go into why I think that. Is because compliance.
Colonialism.
Me too.
Right? Like compliance and this idea that you're trying to make people compliant to a system that doesn't work and has never worked, right? Because you just want workers and people who consume and people who won't speak up and won't critically think about stuff, so you want them to comply. Mm-hmm. And then all the psychologists we were studying in my psych degree were white European old dudes, and it was super sexist, super racist, like all the things we studied. I would be like, why are we studying this dude? And they'd be like, oh, you have to know where you came from to know where you are. And I'm like, okay, I could see that to a degree of like, just just little notes on the guy to be like, he did this, and this. Okay, cool. But we would spend a long time. And then people would use that, like when I got a textbook on ABA when I worked at that place and I opened it up, and within the first page, it starts talking about B.F. Skinner. And I'm like, I run over to my colleague's office and I'm like, I'm like, why are you guys doing what BF Skinner, like, why are you looking at BF Skinner's work and trying to replicate that in community and in clinical? That makes zero sense, because he did not expect anybody to do that. He did not, his stuff was all in the lab and all research based and with animals, which is another huge thing that's important, right? Is like animal trials, which is, we wouldn't do that in humans. It would be unethical to do that in humans. But yeah, this heavy behavior. And then when I started to study biology with my psychology is when it changed. When I started to study neuroscience is when it started to change my outlook, because when you actually understand that your brain doesn't really have free will, your brain reacts to the environment. It's constantly reacting to its environment. And then your body is that behavior that people are seeing is your brain's response to the environment. That's all that, you know what I mean? You're just chemical reactions, basically, walking around.
It's actually kind of funny to me though, because like BF Skinner. So like these things have been debunked a long time ago.
Yes.
By a lot of psychologists.
It shouldn't be used with humans, like period. I don't think he ever intended that. I don't think he ever intended it to be used with humans.
No, absolutely. And it has been like, there have been so many it might be neurobiology
neurobiologists.
It might be. Now that said, it's been debunked so many times, and there's been extensive research on how much trauma some of this causes, even with neurotypical kids.
Yes.
There's Alfie Kahn, who has done extensive work on the area, and like, this is the thing, neurotypicals, and I don't want to put the blame, but
well, it's about taking accountability.
That's the typical society, is that using these things, even though, because one guy said it in 1960, even though 300 have said that's a bad idea, they're like, no, we're going to listen to that one guy from 1960 because that's what works best for us.
It's wild. We were told to take it with a grain of salt in our classes. We were told to take behaviorism with a grain of salt. Even the BAU stuff, even the behavioral analysis folks that love Criminal Minds and all that stuff. You know, my forensic psych prof was like, yeah, but you can't indict someone on a crime because of their behavior. That is unrealistic. We look at their behavior as one aspect of who they are, but you can't just so like, yeah, seeing how professionals here and in the world in general are putting so much weight into that, and then pushing back on us who are trying to say like this is unethical and acting like we're crazy. I just feel like that's a thing. I feel like they act like we're and
I want to backtrack a little bit, because we're talking about this now, but a lot of parents don't understand what the heck we're talking about right now. I should mention, we should probably start. We are bad for being autistic and just assuming everybody has the same knowledge of basics as we do. ABA is a therapy that they use for autistic kids to basically teach them the right way to exist, and the right way to do things, and the right way to do everything, because they don't know how to do anything apparently.
Their version.
They don't know how to do anything the neurotypical way, because we're not neurotypical. But point blank, ABA, and I've made this very clear in my group, and I post this pretty regularly, and actually I'm due to post it again. ABA, the definition of ABA is operant conditioning, behavioral modification. Basically, it's the reward and punishment of behaviors that you want to see more of and that you don't want to see. And they will tell you.
Pavlov's dogs apparently is what a lot of it is based on too. That old psychological experiment. Like training dogs to salivate at the ringing of a bell.
Click training, that kind of stuff. And they will say that they took out the negative reinforcement, but people seem to forget that the lack of a positive reinforcement is a negative reinforcement. So like, if I do this thing and you don't give me a treat for it, then that's a negative reinforcer. That's telling you you're wrong.
Because I feel like they're even they're using positive and negative even incorrectly in clinical. Like, so in sorry, I know it's just that's my thing. So I'm info dumping, but like, positive reinforcement is when you add something. Negative reinforcement is when you take something away. But in like ABA, what those pseudo scientists are doing with these kids is they're acting like negative means a bad thing, and I'm like, nope, negative means you take something away. So you're taking something from somebody to reinforce a behavior, or positive, you're adding something to reinforce a behavior. Like that's what, and you know, my autistic ask is really frustrated because I'm like, you're not even doing the basic principles, you're not understanding of, like, you know, so how are you going to actually change this kid's life when you're not understanding like the basic principles of what you're doing, right?
don't even know what
it's
and
pseudoscience.
3/4 of them are trained in like a 1-day thing. They have no background, don't know anything about what they're doing, and they're basically just doing what they were told to do.
Yes.
But most of them, when you bring this information to them, even though it's defined, even in Google, type in ABA, the definition of ABA, and it will tell you it's operant conditioning and it's behavioralism and it's behavior management and these kinds of things. And look up operant conditioning in Google. Like, these things are not secrets. ABA will tell you what they're doing. They just don't use these words. Now, this is the thing. When you look up an ABA thing, they'll tell you exactly what they're doing. It's not a secret. But when you bring this to an ABA worker, they're like, we're not doing that. I'm like, that's gaslighting at its finest. Like,
I just don't think, I honestly I don't think there's a lot of critical thought.
I don't think a lot of them even know what they're doing.
Yes, I don't think there's a lot of critical thought happening. So, like,
no, because they don't have any background in it, and they're just doing what they're told to do.
And what change could be made, I guess, like, when we're talking about changes, how can we change? Like, I think listening, yes, is a big thing. But then how do we get people to listen if immediately, because what I feel like is happening, everything has to do with safety and being safe or unsafe, right? So even everything comes down to you feeling safe or you feel. So how do we make people feel safe enough to listen? And then also, how do we keep ourselves safe? Because sometimes when they're listening, then they attack because they're not, do you know what I mean? Like, they're
not really listening to take in information. They're listening to answer.
Right. I really want changes to be made, but I think that's why we started the podcast, right, Terry Ange? Like, we wanted platforms where our stories could get, and hope that helps.
Yeah. And like, when it comes to that too, and the changes that we would like to see, that's part of what this podcast is all about, as Kay just said. Like, I'm believing more and more each day now that there are more and more people who are realizing the negative aspects of a lot of things that before they just kind of took at face value in regards to services like ABA, in regards to how generally their attitude and approach to autistic people it's changing quite a bit. But there's that change is seen right now as kind of like an unknown factor for a lot of people, where they're like almost in true neurotypical fashion waiting to see what sides of the scale tips in order to follow the herd when it comes to a lot of things. And like, we look at right now, for example, with your group being so influential as it is, Autism Newfoundland and Labrador, it's 2,000 plus members at this point. It's basically a runaway machine that's building up like a snowball rolling down the side of a hill. Followers,
and I should note, we have hundreds of autistics that are teaching the people in that group. We have hundreds. Like, we're not talking there's 5 of us. I'm talking like there are hundreds of us.
And like, this is it's to the point now where I think we can identify the main driving force behind all this, and that's actually autistic people having a platform, speaking, and people actually taking us seriously for a change. Whereas before, the prevalent attitude that existed was that all autistic perspectives are inherently flawed, that our being is inherently flawed. We can't be right about things, or our perspectives have to be skewed in some way. When more and more time goes by, we know that it's becoming more and more confirmed that autistic perspectives on things and embracing things from our point of view and knowing things about the community and what have you from an autism or an actually autistic baseline, first and foremost, where when autistic people are the ones to go to for everything, from advice to like actually doing and implementing change in our community, because we're first and foremost in our community. The more that happens, just as you had pioneered with your group and just as others are doing and as we're doing now, I think it's going to not necessarily tip the scales in balance, but upend them completely. Like, to the point where, that's what I want to see. At least I want to see actually autistic people at the absolute forefront for everything that has to do with all autistic community matters and all autistic matters, not just in this province, but Canada-wide. And I mean, it's right now it's happening on multiple fronts, all across Canada, all across the world. Like, when it comes to actually autistic matters, we're no longer seen as people with no voice, or that we need neurotypicals to speak for us, and that they somehow inherit our voice. We have a voice of our own, and it's being listened to. for the first
And I
time
do
in a
feel
long
that
time.
they're doing a lot of listening to like the symbols and the wording, and I do feel like they're putting in the effort there. A lot of the like doctors and stuff are trying to listen, and the teachers, and I feel like they're trying to hear us. But when it comes to like services and those kinds of things, and what we actually need as a community, and what the children actually need to get to be
Action, like
adults
actions.
that are not struggling like we are, to get those things in place while they're young. This is the thing, and this is why we do what we do, so that we have all been in our 20s and 30s and still trying to pick up the pieces, because there were so many pieces because nobody knew what they were doing. So we want to make sure that these kids don't have that, and that these things are in place now for those kids. And I think that they really need to start listening to that. They really need to listen to what we need now as autistic adults to fix the damage that's been done, and to avoid the damage with the children coming behind us.
And like on that note, before we end off, like we're close to time, I'm sure, but like I wanted Ange to talk about, because Ange is a part of like kind of more positive reform changes that are happening. So I thought maybe she could give us a little bit of a, if she's comfortable, a little bit of idea of like those things that she is a part of, where they are having they are having those conversations, but we're not seeing them obviously because we're not a part of that, and that's okay only if you're allowed to, Ange. I don't want to like there's stuff that I know you can't talk about because it's still ongoing, but I know that you are having some pretty radically cool conversations with very important people. Fancy people is what I call them. They're the professionals.
Fancies.
I call them biggie wigs, but
same thing, same.
It's all good, no worries. Yeah, no, there's a lot of things that I can't talk about because, I mean, obviously, if you're involved in healthcare at all, you sign all those ethics agreements and everything, and it's patient confidentiality and all of that. But I am encouraged, again, because I work in healthcare, so medical model, and that's still very, very, very prevalent. So the ask is, how do we move forward from where we have been in the medical model, respecting that we still have to look after people's medical-based needs, right? So it's how do we do that in a neuro-affirming way, right? How do we recognize that we need to ask better questions, recognizing that just because a person presents a certain way from what we're expecting doesn't mean that's it doesn't mean it's accurate, even in reflection. Like when we have a meltdown, our version of a meltdown doesn't always look like crawling up the walls, but we're not seen as needing help if that's not the visual presentation. So it's about being able to ask better questions in a better time frame and things like that. And I do feel like that is a process that is being learned, but it is a very slow process because it involves policy change. And it's a whole other bag, because it involves money and involves a whole lot of levels of things that don't change on a dime. It's glacial, right? So, I mean, it's really frustrating for people like us who, it's not about, I want it done now, like my whole ADHD thing kicks in and says, oh my God, how do I bypass this? I need to be able to like fix the thing. But I can't because of all these other barriers. So it becomes really angering. But, like there's some of the discussions that are being had now are learning to ask better questions. And I think that's probably the most positive thing out of all of the groups that I interact with. It's learning that the questions that they have asked up to this point haven't necessarily been the best. And they didn't necessarily hit in the right regions where they needed to. So it's learning that they have to ask the question that, did I get the information that's accurate for this particular case? And that's a really broad layout of, everything that I get to be involved in. Like after I come out of a meeting and, it's all very neurotypical, very medical model, using the old terminologies and things like that. It hurts my head. I can't deny that. I come out feeling like my heart is broken, but I go back and I look at it and I'll say, okay, but where were we 5 months ago?
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I try and have that perspective, which is difficult given my neurotype. You know, it's hard to do, but that's where I use my own tools to try and remind myself to say, okay, we're moving, not necessarily as fast as I might like, but we're moving. So,
Well, I was
yeah.
going to say, yeah, I think that, and then we can talk about Halloween after this, but I think of the
Yay!
things that can actually change today is introducing autistic culture and disability culture to frontline workers. And I think we do that by doing
Yes.
the podcast, by doing Facebook groups, by getting that information out there to the frontline workers. They can use their own discretion then to follow what the disabled community or disability community is saying in general and what the neurodivergent community is saying, because they don't need permission. They don't need to ask permission. They can ask forgiveness. Do you know what I mean? Like if they,
Yes.
if someone finds out to ask forgiveness, that's what I always say to people. I'm like, use your discretion because it's morally and ethically right to follow the voices who are most affected in the community, right? And listen to them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at an emergency room visit, it's currently tiered towards, not necessarily towards the patient, despite all of
Yes.
the,
Patient-centered.
the foofla that's
Yeah.
going on with, our health authority in particular, the new merge and all that.
Yeah.
And the idea is that everything is patient oriented now.
Mm.
But the patient under what framework, right? And right now that's still very much under a neurotypical framework as opposed to an all-inclusive one, right? Because the people who the term inclusive itself seems to be defined by the people who are neurotypical as opposed to neurotypical and neurodivergent, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I mean, it's whoever gets to make whoever is the biggest biggiewig in the room is the one who designs what inclusivity actually looks like, and that doesn't make it right or appropriate or correct.
Thank you, Bree. I agree.
That's what happens.
100%. 100%. I agree with that, and that's something that I've said for a long time as well. In that, when actually autistic people are the ones who decide what is ableist, what is inclusive, what is etc. When our voices are first and foremost in that discussion, then it actually does end up being valid. Whereas if we're going by social hierarchy and who happened to be working in what area the longest at any given time, half the time if someone's like, I make these decisions because I have 15 plus years doing this. That just tells us that they're 15 plus years out of date compared to where they should be right now. And we are the ones that need to tell them.
To even get in those positions, they aren't probably dealing with disability. Like, not to have a blanket statement, but the majority of the time, a lot of us have unstable employment or no employment a lot of the time. And that's not just us, that's the disability community in general, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of a larger part of the discussion that I hope we'll do, future in the podcast as well, too, is that the assumption that just because you're autistic means you're disabled. No. There's loads of people who are autistic, who are ADHD and, different neurotypes, but don't identify with the disability community, either then or, because it's a dynamic process, right? Like that's the
there's
game.
also a lot of us that make it to 40 and 50 and crash because we didn't have any supports that whole time because we were doing fine.
Yeah, and then we become
we
disabled.
were viewed as being fine.
Yeah.
And then we become by a system that doesn't work for us. So
do you guys want to talk about Kiki about Halloween now? I don't know what talk about. It says Halloween. So
Bree is actually
the most wonderful time of the year.
I look at Bree as being like the queen of Halloween, and I happily donated to her Halloween stash last night. So
as if the Pentagon or the pentagram
behind her
background didn't tip us off to that already. But
let's not go back to government. No pentagons. I don't know if I can. Or pentagrams. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Oh, you got some gear.
Oh, my whole room.
I've seen your decorations. Pictures of your decorations.
I have tons.
For those of us who have no visual
my closet
concept,
is like mostly
what
black.
we're looking at.
Oh yeah, describe what we're looking at because some people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a Nightmare Before Christmas towel. It's purple and red and black and dark-ish. And then I have
darkish.
And then I have a hoodie that's hung up there because it doesn't fit me. So it's just sitting there looking pretty. And then I have like a dragon picture with all my necklaces hung around it. And then I have a shelf there that's a coffin shape shelf with some stones and stuff on it and a dragon on top. And then I have skulls on my wall, and I have a black and white striped Beetlejuicy looking mirror. And Oogie
I
Boogie
have this
sitting next
image
to it.
in my mind that your bed is a coffin. I want it to be a coffin. Is it a coffin?
That would be so cool.
Yeah, but that's just like one wall in my room. Behind me, I have a huge pentagon with snakes on it and moons and.
I feel like Halloween is a very a safe like I've always really gravitated towards Halloween because I'm, as in Beetlejuice, I am strange and unusual. I myself am strange and unusual, so
Yeah.
I've always felt really comfortable.
Beetlejuice, yeah.
Yeah, I've always felt very
Beetlejuice.
comfortable with Halloween, and Beetlejuice is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one of my favorites.
It's actually funny because part of being autistic means that we don't necessarily make sense. In that, like, I'm obsessed with Batman, but I don't like Batman movies.
Right.
I'm
Well,
just
some of them are
obsessed
quite
with-
boring. So.
Yeah, I love the logo. So, like, or like sometimes we can be able to name all parts of something and not know anything else about other parts of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we're compartmentalized, if that makes sense. But it's kind of funny because Halloween is my favorite. I absolutely love Halloween things. My house is decorated. I actually said to a friend the other day, I went and got Halloween decor. And she is like, "Oh, so you got home decor?" I'm like, "Yeah, exactly." It pretty much stays up all year round. The only ones that go away say Happy Halloween. Other than that, everything else stays basically. But the point I'm getting at here is that I actually don't like Halloween Day. I actually don't like trick-or-treating. I don't like the outside. It's cold. I don't want to go.
I don't want to be up in people's houses
If I
either.
didn't have kids,
Yeah.
I would be at home watching Halloween movies, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I don't like trick-or-treating. I don't like that part of Halloween. I like the aesthetic. And I also, it's funny because Nightmare Before Christmas, I'm obsessed with Nightmare Before Christmas. I only watched it for the first time 9 years ago when I moved to St. John's. I didn't know Tim Burton existed. I had never watched anything other than Beetlejuice as a kid.
Tim Burton's autistic as well, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Which
I
explains a lot.
actually still to this day have not seen like Practical Magic or anything. So
I
have to watch
Magic
that
is
this
so
year.
good. I would definitely recommend it. It's really
Yes.
good.
I
I'm
just
not
don't watch
big
a lot of
movie
movies, and I don't
Yeah.
watch a lot of TV, right? So
Yeah.
growing up, if it wasn't a movie we had in the house, I didn't really watch it. And as an adult, I rarely watch movies, so I have to like make an actual effort. ADHD. I can't sit still long enough to watch a movie most of the time. So, but yeah, so it's just kind of odd because I have all these things and I'm obsessed with all these things, but I don't really like the movies, nor do I like scary movies. You would think, looking at all my stuff, that I love scary movies. I hate scary movies. I can't watch anything with a climax. My anxiety goes through the roof, and I have a panic attack. It's just not happening.
Fair enough.
Fair.
Yeah.
I like the points I like about Halloween are what always gravitated me towards it, in that everybody seems to be actively masking in the same sense that I would typically be
Yes.
actively
Yeah.
masking. And
Everybody's
there's-
playing.
yeah, and it's the same thing that I think draws a lot of autistic people towards drama and theater. In
Yes.
that it's what things are going to be scripted. We're all going to have like a certain
Yeah.
theme that we're going to go by, and that that's in my wheelhouse already. Like, I'm down.
Yeah.
Like, sign me up.
I don't think it's the rigidity per se. I think it's the predictability. for
Predictability.
resources,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? Like,
Knowing
you
the
know,
expectations.
yeah, you know how you're going to feel at something. It's the same reason we watch the same bloody movie time and time and time
Yeah.
again, because
Yeah,
if
you know
we
what's going to happen. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Do we
Yeah.
want to?
That's why I don't mind spoilers. I really don't mind spoilers.
neither.
Yeah,
Some
we're on
people
our
hate
last 2
spoilers.
minutes. So
Okay.
I
we'll
really
wrap it
like.
up
I
now.
want to know what's going to happen. I still want to watch to figure out how we got there,
But
but I
read,
want to
like,
know
the
what
last
happened.
pages in a book because of that. I'll
Yep.
read the
Yeah.
last pages in my book because
I
I'll be
used
like,
to do that too.
I need to have. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, we
I
have
read the
what,
table
1
of
minute?
contents. That's my
1
gig.
minute left? But yeah, we should clue up, and I think that this went really well. Thank you, Bree, for being a part of our podcast. We will definitely see you again. And we're neurodivergent Newfoundlanders and Labradorians.
And this?
Is
Alterminds. Stay tuned for our next episode where we discuss the dark side as well as the light side of being neurodivergent. Thanks for listening.